Hello and welcome back to RPG PhD. I'm Dr. Ben. There's a player at a lot of tables who's technically doing everything right. They show up, they engage, they roll when they're supposed to roll. Their character has a backstory. They participate in the planning scenes. But when the Game Master builds a moment that should land emotionally, something that took 3 sessions to set up, it just kind of bounces off. The player nods, says something like, "Yeah, my character's really shaken by this," and then asks what they need to roll. The table moves on. The moment dissolves. The standard read on this might be that the player isn't invested, that if they just engage more, the scene would have worked. That read might be wrong. The player was there and was trying. The problem is that nobody ever taught them what being in a scene actually requires. Boleslavski did. There's a 90-year-old book that could fix a lot of what breaks at your table, and you may have never heard of it. This is part 1 of a 2-part series working through Richard Boleslavski's Acting the First 6 Lessons and applying all 6 to the table through the lens of players, game masters, and designers. Today we're covering the first 3: concentration, memory of emotion, and dramatic action. Part 2 covers characterization, observation, and rhythm and pulls everything together into a practical guide. So, let's get into it. In 1933, a Russian-trained acting teacher named Richard Boleslavski published a small book called Acting the First 6 Lessons. It's structured as 6 dialogues between a teacher and a young actress. Each lesson isolates one capacity that separates a technically present performer from one who is alive in a scene. The writing is warm, specific, and occasionally funny. It reads nothing like a textbook. Boleslavski had trained under Stanislavski at the Moscow Art Theater, arguably one of the most demanding actor training programs in history. He brought the system to America and founded the American Laboratory Theater in New York in the early 1920s. His students there included Lee Strasberg and Stella Adler, 2 people who would go on to shape how American actors work for the rest of the century. Many persistent issues at a table traces back to one or more of those 6 lessons going unaddressed. The passive player who can't stay in a scene, the NPC who feels like furniture, the combat encounter that's mechanically clean and emotionally inert, the game master who can't read the room, the session where everything was technically fine but yet nothing landed. Boleslavski had a diagnosis for all of them. And we're going to go through each lesson and view the issues from the perspective of players, game masters, and designers. Because the same lesson hits differently depending on your perspective, and so does the fix. Lesson 1, concentration. Picture a player mid-session. Phone is away, and they're at the table. But between turns, they're scanning their character sheet, checking a rule, thinking about what they're going to do when the spotlight comes back around to them. The Game Master describes something happening to another character, something with real emotional weight, and this player half hears it because they're already loading their next action. Their body is at the table, but their attention is somewhere else. Boleslavski called this the first and most foundational problem an actor can have. In the first lesson, he writes that concentration for an actor is the ability to place your attention fully inside the fictional world and keep it there while the scene moves around you. He's not talking about focus in the generic sense. He means something more specific. The actor who is concentrated is barely aware of the audience, of monitoring their own performance, or calculating what comes next. They are inside the situation the fiction has created, responding to it as if it were real. The player's side of this. This is where many conversations about concentration start and stop. In this view, the player's problem is rarely laziness or disengagement, it's that nobody told them where to put their attention. Boleslavski was very specific about the object of concentration for an actor. In a scene, the object is the other people in it. What are they doing? What do they want? What does this moment require from you? The actor who is watching their scene partner is gathering information in real time that makes their next response authentic. The actor who is thinking about their next line is not watching anyone. At the table, this translates directly. The player whose attention is on the fiction and the other players between turns is ready when their moment arrives because they've been in the scene the whole time. The player who spent those turns on their character sheet has to be caught up before they can respond, and the scene has usually moved past the moment by that point. The single most useful question a player can ask themselves between turns is not, what am I going to do? It's, what is actually happening right now? That shift is small, but the difference it makes at the table can be huge. The Game Master's side of this. The Game Master's concentration problem is different from the players because Game Masters are running multiple things at once. They're tracking the NPCs, the fiction, the room, the pacing, and whatever prep they brought to the table. That's a lot of objects competing for attention. Prep functions as a concentration tool, and many Game Masters don't think about it in that way. Enough preparation means the world might be stable enough in your head that you can stay inside the scene while running it. Too little and you might be in your own head, filling gaps, improvising structure instead of inhabiting the fiction. The over-prepped Game Master might stop listening to the players because the session they planned is the session they're running regardless of what's happening at the table. The sweet spot is prep that gives you enough to hold the world without scripting all the responses. Which is easier to say than to do sometimes, but it's worth knowing what you're looking for. The designer's side of this. Every rule that requires a player to leave the fiction and perform a calculation is what Boleslavski would recognize as a concentration break. You're in the scene, the dragon breathes fire, and then you have to check your damage resistances, subtract from your hit points, check whether you're now below the threshold for a specific condition, and reference what that condition does. By the time you're done, the scene is moved on, and you're catching up instead of inhabiting it. Designers make concentration decisions constantly. A system that keeps resolution language close to the fiction, where the mechanics describe what's happening in the world, instead of what's happening to a stat block, keeps players closer to the scene. A system that front-loads mechanical processing before players can respond to anything might pull them out of it. This isn't an argument against mechanical complexity. Some tables want that layer, and it's the right choice for them. The point is that every time a rule asks a player to step outside the fiction to operate it, that's a cost. Designers who know they're spending concentration can at least decide what they're buying with it. Lesson 2. Memory of emotion. A player's character just lost someone, an NPC they'd been building a relationship with for 2 months of real time, 6 sessions of fiction, an NPC the Game Master had threaded into the campaign specifically because of this character's backstory. The Game Master frames it carefully. The scene has weight, and the table goes quiet for a moment. The player says my character is devastated and rolls perception to check if anyone followed them. There's nothing wrong with this. The player is doing exactly what the game asked them to do. But there's a gap between my character feels this and actually feeling anything, and many players live in that gap for their entire time in the hobby without ever knowing there's another option. Boleslavski's second lesson is about closing that gap. He called it memory of emotion, drawing on Stanislavski's earlier work on what the Russian tradition called affective memory. The core idea is this: an actor cannot manufacture genuine emotion on demand. You can't decide to feel grief and then feel grief. What you can do is reach into your own history and find a memory that carries the same emotional texture as the scene requires. Hold that memory underneath the performance and let it do the work that fabricated emotion can't. He was careful about how he described it. The memory doesn't have to match the situation. An actor playing someone who lost a parent doesn't need to have lost a parent. They just need access to the feeling of irreversible loss. Where that feeling lives in their own history is personal. The technique is in finding it and using it deliberately instead of waiting for it to arrive on its own. For some players, the fiction itself generates the feeling, the scene lands, the moment hits, and no technique is required at all. For others, the connection between the fiction and anything emotionally real runs much thinner, and that's where effective memory becomes useful. Knowing the tool exists means you can reach for it deliberately instead of waiting for the fiction to do the work on its own. And it's worth saying plainly that deep emotional engagement is not every player's goal, and that's a legitimate preference. There are as many ways to play these games as there are people playing them. This lens is looking at one specific thing: what becomes available when a player chooses to bring that layer to the table. The player's side of this. Here's something many players notice but maybe don't say out loud. The same wound keeps showing up in character after character that they play. Different names, different systems, different campaigns. The same grief, the same chip on the shoulder, the same specific flavor of loneliness or anger or need for approval. The fictional details change. The emotional material underneath doesn't. Boleslavski would say that's the raw material. He wouldn't tell you to diversify it, he'd tell you to learn to use it. The player who knows what their emotional material is can direct it. They can choose when to let it into the scene and when to hold it back. They can use it to fuel a moment that needs weight instead of just announcing that the moment has weight. And then moving on to the next role. You don't have to tell anyone at the table what you're drawing on. The technique is entirely internal. The only thing that shows is what comes out in the fiction. And what comes out when a player is in contact with their own emotional history is recognizably different from what comes out when you're performing a character concept. The table feels it. The game master side of this. Some game masters use emotional memory constantly when they're running well, and many of them would describe it as instinct or even technique. The NPC voice that comes out a little rougher than planned because the scene needed it. The location description that lingers longer than the room warrants because something about it connected. That's emotional memory operating in practice, and the game master being able to recognize the emotional moment and live within it. The craft version is more deliberate. Before a scene that carries weight, the game master who asks themselves, what does this actually feel like, and where have I felt something close to it, is doing Boleslavski's Lesson 2. That question takes a few seconds and it changes what comes out on the other side, or at least it can. The hazard is also worth naming. Game masters who draw heavily on personal, emotional material without awareness of what they're pulling from can introduce content the table didn't sign up for, weighted with a significance the players can't account for because they don't know where it's coming from. Emotional memory is a tool, and like most tools, it requires some awareness of what you're doing with it. The designer side of this. The games that create the most emotionally resonant play are almost never the ones that tell players what to feel. They're the ones that create conditions for players to bring their own emotional history into contact with the fiction. Bond mechanics work this way. They're asking for a connection between something real in the player and something present in the fiction. That hook is where some emotional memory does its work. The design failure on this lesson is usually the opposite: systems that demand emotional stakes without giving players anywhere to attach them. A backstory field on a character sheet that asks, what does your character fear most, is a prompt toward emotional memory. A system that never references that information again has severed the connection before it could do anything. In this framework, the designer's job is to build the emotional scaffolding and then get out of the way. Lesson 3, Dramatic Action. Here's a combat encounter. The party is fighting a mercenary captain who's been hunting them for 4 sessions. The game master has built him carefully. He has a name, a history, a reason for what he does. The fight is mechanically well designed, tense on paper, with interesting terrain and a time pressure element. The players roll well. The captain goes down in 3 rounds. Someone loots the body. Nobody at the table felt anything. The encounter had stakes on paper. It had none in the room. And the reason, the specific mechanical and fictional reason, is that nobody in that scene was doing anything to anybody else. They were executing a tactical problem. The captain was an obstacle with hit points. The players were a solution with attack rolls. The fiction moved, but nothing in the scene was ever directed at a person. Boleslavski's 3rd lesson is the one that fixes this, and it's also the one that has the most direct application to game design of any lesson in the book. He called it dramatic action, and his definition is precise. Dramatic action is a transitive verb directed at another person in the scene. A transitive verb is an action that requires an object, something or someone it's being done to. You don't just speak, you convince, pressure, confront, or humiliate a specific person. The verb needs a target to be complete. It lands on someone. It wants something from them. Movement, activity, the character does something. All of that falls short of what Boleslavski means. I persuade the merchant is a task. I make her feel guilty for turning away someone her guild swore to protect is a dramatic action. In other words, to shame her, specifically in a way that costs her something. The difference is a target and a want. Every moment on stage, Boleslavski argued, needs an action in this sense. The player who knows their action in every beat of a scene is playing something real. In this framework, the player who is moving through the scene without a transitive verb is giving a technically competent action that might be easily unremarkable. The player's side of this. Many players, if you ask them mid-session what their character is doing, could tell you. Some of them, if you asked what their character is doing to the other people in the scene, would have to stop and think. That gap is lesson 3. The shift Boleslavski is asking for is about having a verb with a target before you engage with a scene. I negotiate with the guildmaster is a task. To expose her as someone who sold out her own members to protect her position is a dramatic action. It has a direction. It lands on a person. It wants something specific from them. And because it wants something specific, the player is in relationship with the NPC rather than processing an obstacle. This changes what happens when the scene doesn't go as planned. A player with a dramatic action can respond to an unexpected NPC move because they know what they're after. A player who was executing a plan has to recalculate from scratch. It also changes what happens between players. Some of the best moments at any table come from a player whose dramatic action is directed at another player character rather than at an NPC. The scene that becomes about what two characters want from each other rather than what the party wants from the environment can be interesting in their own right. Boleslavski would say that's because it was the only scene where anyone was actually doing anything. The Game Master side of this. Scene framing is where Game Masters either apply Lesson 3 or abandon it. A Game Master who opens a scene with a description is doing set dressing. The inn looks like this or the city sounds like that. The NPC is standing there. That's all useful, but it's not drama. This is where the theatrical concept of conflict becomes useful, and it's worth being clear about what that word means in this context, because it doesn't mean combat. In theater, conflict is the engine of all drama. It's what happens when two people in a scene want incompatible things from each other, or when what a character wants externally runs against what they need internally. It doesn't require raised voices or drawn swords. A conversation where one person is trying to forgive someone who isn't ready to be forgiven is full of conflict. A negotiation where both parties need to deal, but neither can afford to look like they need it, is also full of conflict. The dramatic action is the player's contribution to that engine. Because it wants something specific from a specific person, the player is in relationship with the scene rather than just processing an obstacle. A game master who opens a scene with pressure, someone in the fiction wanting something specific from a specific player character, is doing dramatic action from the first line. The two scenes can share identical descriptive content. One of them requires the players to generate all their own momentum. The other arrives already moving. The practical habit is a question the game master asks in prep for every scene that involves an NPC with any significance. What is this person trying to do to someone at this table? Not what do they want in general, that's backstory. The question is what verb they are performing in this specific scene, directed at which character, for what reason. A merchant who has information is not a dramatic action. A merchant who is trying to expose the paladin as naive to unmask her faith in people as a liability in front of her companions is. When the Game Master knows the action, it changes every line the NPC delivers and gives the scene a spine. The designer side of this. In this framework, the rules around encounter design are almost entirely a question of dramatic action, and many designers think about it only in terms of difficulty, terrain, and action economy instead. The question Boleslavski would ask about any encounter is, what is everyone in this scene trying to do to someone else? When the answer for the creature is deal damage and reduce hit points, the scene has no dramatic action on the Game Master's side. A troll crawling through a doorway is a threat. A troll that has cornered the party's youngest, least experienced player character and is methodically dismantling every escape route they try, savoring the futility, is doing something to someone. The mechanics can be identical, but the felt experience is completely different. This extends to social encounters, which is where a lot of tabletop role-playing game design leaves the most on the table. A contested persuasion roll resolves whether the player succeeds or fails. It tells you nothing about what the player was actually doing to the NPC, what they wanted from them specifically, or what it cost both parties when the roll landed. This framework would say that systems that build dramatic action into the resolution mechanic, that ask players to declare their intent in transitive terms before the dice come out, are solving this problem. The same logic applies to faction design, NPC motivation, and villain construction. A villain who wants power is an obstacle. A villain who wants to prove to a specific person that they were always right about them is a dramatic action. And every scene they're in has a direction. So that's the first 3 lessons: concentration, memory of emotion, and dramatic action. 3 things that change what it feels like to be inside a scene before a single die hits the table. In part 2, we're going to cover the remaining 3 lessons: characterization, observation, and rhythm, look at the pitfalls of all 6 lessons, and then pull all 6 into a practical guide you can actually use at your table. If you want to catch when it drops, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss it. And as always, thanks for watching. See you next time.